Welcome back, everyone. This is Radio Free Market, and I'm your host, Michael McKay, and with me is Mr. Lew Rockwell, and we're talking about, at this particular moment, jobs. And we were just talking about the resistance that people have to any job, any free market attempts toward improving the job situation because they want good-paying jobs, and that is a limiting factor in the public's mind. Would you comment on that, Lou?
Well, it's true, and people think that if we remove these interventions, that everybody would be forced to work for 10 cents an hour or whatever. But you only have to stop to think for just a second that in the current system, if business had that sort of power, then how come we're not all working for the minimum wage? It would be perfectly legal for every single person in America to be paid the minimum wage. Well, there's a reason that even though businessmen would like to get the cheapest, best employees they can get, there's such a thing as competition. So they can't just offer you a dime an hour if there were no minimum wage. They have to compete with all the other businesses that might want to hire you. So, but again, you mentioned good-paying jobs. We all want good-paying jobs, but the government can't just mandate that. We talked about the minimum wage. If the government wanted to say, if the government actually could make everybody rich, why don't they set the minimum wage at, say, $1,000 an hour? Hey, we'd all be living it up. But of course, if they did that, we'd all be unemployed, or everybody except people in Hollywood.
The reality is that in a market-based labor contract, there really is no exploitation. Could you explain that?
Well, this is a Marxist concept of exploitation, which he believed employing somebody to do a job, to Karl Marx, was exploitation. And he believed that if you had communism, you would abolish exploitation. Well, of course, not quite. You had real exploitation. And the great Austrian economist Bill Hutt said we should think of exploitation as the use of violence or the threat of violence in an employment situation. The way unions do it, by the way, the way everything was in the Soviet Union, the way some things are here, that is actual exploitation. So there is exploitation. So if we would get the government out of the labor market, there would be no exploitation in the sense of hurting somebody or making them do things they don't want to do.
So there is no involuntary unemployment in a free market because there's always work to be done in this world. And as you say, it is all a matter of making the deal. And this can only be done if the government just gets out of the way.
And the government has not raised people's income. Now, it's true that union guys can get more under the current system than they might get in a free market. People like, say, public school teachers get a whole lot more. Any government bureaucrats get a lot more. But those of us in the private sector, in the voluntary sector, all our incomes are dramatically lower because of all the things the government does, whether it's Social Security or all the interventions that have been going on for so long and stepped up, especially with the New Deal and Franklin Roosevelt, and then the Great Society under Johnson, and the horrible period we've had of high inflation and high welfare stateism and warfare stateism under George W. Bush and now Barack H. Obama.
Okay. What we're really zeroing in on is a conversation about the price system. And I love talking about the price system because the price system is the choice system. And people have heard us talk about before on this show that the miracle of prices, brings us to the discussion of the miracle of choices. Please explain, if you would, how this miracle of prices and the price system really brings the miracle of choices to everybody.
Well, I like hearing you say the word miracle. It reminds me of the great Leonard Read, always referred to the price system as the miracle of the market, because it does seem like a miracle. You have billions, maybe trillions of choices being made every day by people over this whole earth in buying and selling or not buying and selling, and attempting to make their lives better, take care of their families, be able to give charitable donations or whatever else they might want to do, have a vacation. So it's rather than having, we actually have two choices in this world. Either you can have central planning agency like the old GOS plan under the Soviet Union, or what I'm afraid the American government is becoming more and more like, where things are ordered, where you get an order and they put a gun to your head, in effect, and they say, do it or we're going to put you in jail or kill you. Remember, the government is that institution which claims the right to kill you if you sufficiently resist paying your parking ticket. Right. So that's their attitude. But the price system is entirely voluntary, and it's not planned by anyone. Again, it's the billions of people making trillions of decisions, and all to the good, and raising standards of living, getting us out of poverty to the extent that it's possible for the market, despite all the government interventions. Now, we're far poorer. All of us in the whole world are far poorer than we would be if it weren't for governments. But nevertheless, to the extent that we're able to not just be primitive cave people digging in the dirt with a stick and trying to plant a little seed, to the extent we don't live like that, it's entirely due to the freedom of the price system and
the price system
and
really
private property, because you've got to have private property to have a real price system.
Right.
As Mises pointed out, that's what the trouble with socialism is.
Right.
There is no private property in the means of production. So you have to have private property, but based on private property, this miracle of the market gives us everything we eat, gives us our houses, our clothes, our futures, and that's civilization, and the government is the enemy, unfortunately, of civilization.
Yeah. The central planners definitely try to limit these choices. One of my favorite stories that we have told here on Radio Free Market a couple of times, because we've had Dr. Yuri Maltsev on this show many times, is Yuri tells the story about after he had defected from the Soviet Union in the early 1990s, when his former boss, who was then working for the Russian government, came over to the United States and was in Washington, and they decided to spend an evening together, and they went to a liquor store, and his former boss went to a display and got a six-pack of O'Doul's, a non-alcoholic beer, and put it up on the counter. And Yuri ran over and said, no, you don't want that. This is a non-alcoholic beer. And his boss said, oh, that's ridiculous. Who would make such a thing? And Yuri said, no, yes, this is exactly non-alcoholic beer. You don't want to have it. And this boss said to Yuri, who would approve the production of such a thing? And that story gets right at the heart of this entire process of central control. It is equivalent to the removal of choices. And that's exactly the kind of thing that we're facing the more government mandates these fewer options to us.
And as Dr. Bill Peterson, who was a colleague of Mises's at New York University, always points out, this is sort of the democracy of the marketplace. He would argue that democracy is not so hot politically because of what it's led to, but in the marketplace, sort of everybody's got to vote, and that's everybody in the world is going to vote to the extent we have free trade and are able to have dealings in nations and among nations, and yet, to the extent that's free, we benefit.
And yet, as the Congress and the President creates yet another crisis, they stand to be able to take advantage of. The thought comes, why won't it work to just throw the current crop of bums out?
Well, I think it's a good thing to throw the current crop of bums out. The only trouble is there's another crop of bums who come in. So, and
they even have more clout behind them.
Well, yeah, especially because they'll have the mandate. But when I hear the Republicans talking about repealing this bill, it's just, the Republicans have never repealed anything, ever. Mm-hmm. In their entire history, they've never repealed anything. So at least the Democrats got rid of prohibition. So the Republicans keep expanding everything, and when the Democrats get in, they want to keep all this stuff in existence because they want the contracts, they want the river of payoffs that come about through these government interventions to their party and their people, and they want to put their people in charge. So neither one of these parties the Republicans may talk limited government, but of course it's not true, and we just have to think about what George W. Bush was like, although I'll admit that Obama's worse, but Roger Garrison, great Austrian economist Roger Garrison, once pointed out that sooner or later every president makes you nostalgic for his predecessor. And I never thought I'd miss George W. Bush, but now I do. So, and I missed Clinton, of course, when Bush was in. So.
Oh, that's very funny. Well, let me ask you, what do you think of the states challenging federal authority on strictly internal matters such as, their environmental laws, land use, medical marijuana, et cetera?
Gosh, I think this is one of the most encouraging developments that's happening in our country. We have, for the first time in many, many years, an increase in the constitutional principles of nullification, for example, and interposition, and even secession. So Thomas Jefferson, Dr. Tom Woods, by the way, has a great book coming out at the end of June called Nullification, and it's about the history and the reason for this concept. But the fact that people are realizing that you actually just don't have to you don't have to lie down and let the feds roll over you. There are ways that you can say no, because every government has to ultimately depend on the consent of the governed, and if they don't have that consent, then they can't do anything. And that partly has to do with the fact that the group of people living off the majority is of necessity a minority, and then they live off the majority. I want to recommend Murray Rothbard's great introduction to the politics of obedience, and you can find that on the Mises site.
I've read this book by Lebwedy.
By Lebwedy, a lawyer.
Yeah, it's a fantastic
French lawyer.
book. Yeah,
maybe the first great libertarian work ever.
Yes, I think it's absolutely spectacular work that most people have never heard of this gentleman, and Murray's fabulous introduction to it is truly inspiring. The politics of obedience, why people basically take it. Why do we take this?
Well, what he said in Political Science, he's writing in the 16th century. He said that the people who study politics, they always want to figure out how can we make sure that people obey? How can we make sure that nobody disobeys? But he said to him the question was, why the heck does anybody obey?
Right.
Why do some guy sets himself up as king, and he says, I want some of your property? Why do people go? I want your life to fight my war and so forth. How come they obey? He said this is to him the great mystery of politics.
Right.
And so his book is a short book, easy to read. Very well written, wonderful translation, and as you say, the Rothbard intro just brilliant. So it's a great work of libertarian political philosophy.
I think it's probably one of the most paradigm-shifting things that anyone can read in less than an hour. It is The Politics of Obedience. It's available at Mises.org. That's MISES.org, and you'll find it under the literature section. And I highly recommend to everyone that they go and read that absolutely excellent essay. Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. Thank you for bringing that up. Greatly appreciate that. Well, do you see the future of America with the development of more and more states asserting their local sovereignty or their local rights?
Well, there's a crisis coming, and I think with the crisis, we're already seeing an indication of it, and it's the result of huge amounts of intervention, huge amounts of taxation, meddling with our lives for a long period. But it started back during the whole Tea Party business. Actually, I would argue it started with the Ron Paul presidential campaign, when he called forth millions of young people who all of a sudden, thanks to Austrian economics and thanks to Ron Paul, were thinking, well, wait a minute, the Federal Reserve is ripping us off. We don't need an institution like that. In fact, we don't need to be an empire with bases in 700 places all over the world and in virtually every country, trying to control other countries at vast cost to the average American taxpayer. We don't actually have to have this regime. And again, people are exploring things in American history, and Thomas Jefferson's and James Madison's great Virginia and Kentucky Resolves of 1798, where they argued that if the federal government is trying to pass some unconstitutional legislation, the states have the perfect right to say, hey, wait a minute, not in my state, not in our state. You're not going to bring that in here because it's unconstitutional. And we've we've unfortunately been brainwashed into the notion that only the Supreme Court can somehow declare things constitutional or not. But the original view was that the states had that power, the Congress had that power, that all different sectors of society could in effect say that. So if the state of Texas says they don't want that health care plan, I think it's very, very interesting that we hear talk about nullification and other what people might think of as antique principles from the 18th century. But I think they're alive and hot. The government doesn't like them. The regime doesn't like them. They try to smear it. But I think it's very, very encouraging. And how this is all is going to eventuate, who knows? But it's not correct to think that all is lost by any means. There's a huge amount of interest by Americans in real economics, in real history, and in resisting the federal government. If we remember back to right after 9/11, it seemed like there were 7 of us who were concerned about what was going on in Washington. Now there's just vast numbers, and I think it's very, very. I'm very encouraged. And again, by all this talk of nullification.
That's very good to hear. I'm glad to hear that you're feeling very encouraged about that, because I know that when you're standing up for freedom, often it feels like a pretty lonely place. And, I also want to spend this moment just to plug our own show here, Radio Free Market. And please, folks, go to the archives. On March 20th, 2010, I did an interview with Dr. Yuri Maltsev on this topic of nullification, secession, interposition, in relationship to how it contributed to the collapse of the Soviet Empire. But interwoven in that was some of this information about American history as well. This is a topic that everyone needs to get some background on. Unfortunately, it's completely not taught in our school system, and I think everyone should really take the time to start to learn about that. And I also am looking forward to Tom Woods' new book on nullification that will be coming out in a couple of months. So we're going to be coming up on a break, but before we do, I want to take this opportunity to start to plug the Mises Institute, for which you, Lew, are the CEO and founder of. The Mises Institute is at the vanguard of Austrian economics, which we here at Radio Free Market often refer to as reality economics, which is important because reality is not optional. And we're going to talk more about that in our final segment, which is about to happen in a couple of minutes, right after we finish this next break. So please stay with us. This is Radio Free Market, and I'm your host, Michael McKay, talking with Lew Rockwell, and we'll be back in just a second. Thank you for listening. Welcome back, everyone. This is Radio Free Market, and I'm going to turn it over to our special commentator, Zoe Russell, who we were talking about this topic of the Mises Institute during the break. Please, Zoe, go ahead.
Well, right. I went to Mises University in 2009, and I was actually an economics major from college. And when I graduated, I thought, what do you do after I graduated, which was late planning? I thought, what do you do with an econ major? What do you do when you dislike, let's say, hate the government? Where do you go with an economics major? Well, this is the place to go with your econ major if you're somewhat different. And believe me, you will meet extremely intelligent people in their grad programs. You can learn about which universities are friendly to Austrian economics. You can figure out ways. You don't necessarily have to go back to school to enjoy something like the Mises University. It'll basically give you a wonderful starting point, introduction into Austrian economics, and let you have this major network. They send out an email list. You have a huge network of people that now have the same mindset as you, and you can see where they're taking their careers and what they've learned and where they're going with economics. So I just had a wonderful time.
That's great. So, Lew, talk about some of these programs that the Mises Institute has developed for helping people, just average people, apply Austrian economics, what again we like to call reality economics, to their practical lives, because this really is about making your life more productive and living in a more peaceful, cooperative society.
Well, I'll just mention, first of all, the Mises University program that Zoe attended It's been going on for, I guess, about 26 years, and we've had a huge number of very smart kids from all over the world, not only from the United States, and it's just an extraordinary group. Many of them now teaching, others in business like Zoe, some of them practicing law. They go into, some of them are history professors, but it's all, they continue to be involved in the fight for liberty, whatever their career path is. And I think that week at the Mises University in the summer here in Auburn, kids tell me it was the best thing in their whole educational career. That 1 week they learned more there than they did in 4 years of college. We have, as always said, we have graduate students as well as undergraduates, even an occasional high school student, although that's pretty rare. So the Mises Institute is about teaching the truths of, as you say, reality economics, Austrian economics, and of classical liberalism and libertarianism, that is the freedom philosophy. So we have the Mises University. We have graduate students who come and spend the whole summer with us and in directed research and producing papers. We have people who sometimes come and do their doctoral work with us, spend a year after they finish their coursework and do their dissertation here. We have programs for non-economists. We have professional programs for economists. We just finished the big Austrian Scholars Conference, Michael, that we were very glad to have you there just recently. So we have all kinds of physical programs. We have a wonderful library here in Auburn, a great library of Austrian economics and classical liberalism, full of books that are available nowhere else, except in maybe the Library of Congress or the very, very big libraries. But
in our last
we also
minute,
put out publications. We put out academic journals, many, many books, hundreds and hundreds of books in Austrian economics and classical liberalism and libertarianism.
And I would say, I'm going to interrupt you here, Lew, because we are into our last minute and we are going to have to break. But everyone should go to Mises.org, MISES.org. Sign up for the daily reports. They are just phenomenal. You will learn so much just by getting this daily information. So I want to thank you, Mr. Lew Rockwell and Zoe Russell, for being with us today. This is Michael McKay and Radio Free Market. Please visit us on the web at radiofreemarket.com, where you can download this and all of our shows for free. And until next week, wherever you are, please stand up for freedom. Thank you for listening.